Hello and welcome to Pod Maverick presents Kirk Your Enthusiasm. I am Kirk Henderson, editor-in-chief over at Mavs Moneyball, and I am joined today, and I'm very delighted by this, by Logan Thompson, who's one of our contributors and one of our big draft aficionados, and we are really excited to talk about all of the possibilities of this upcoming draft, but we'll see obviously we'll have a lot more clarity on Tuesday. And Logan, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Kirk?
Not bad. It's a nice day here in Texas, all things considered. I think it's just going to be rainy and weird all weekend.
The Suns lost. That was fun. The playoffs were kind of concerning. Like the Lakers were doing good. There's a lot of stuff I wasn't liking that I was seeing, but it's starting to even out. I'm on the Nuggets train, and Booker kind of going down a little bit. The things are going okay.
I agree with that. That was a pleasant surprise to see Devin Booker shoot in his past two. What do you want to call it? The games where the Nuggets were closed out. He shot 7 for 27, which is really remarkable when you look at his games 3 and 4 at home when he was shooting like 1,000,000,000%.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite thing about Booker is how he really seems to like to model his game off of Kobe. Well, Kobe missed. Like Booker's like such a mid-range assassin, but with the draft coming up for these, or with the draft lottery coming up for these Mavericks, part of why we wanted to get you on beforehand is so we could really kind of talk about the pie in the sky guys before that goes out the window, because the Mavericks have an 80% likelihood of staying at 10, a 20% likelihood of falling out, a 3% likelihood of jumping to number 1, and then something like, I want to say it's like 13% to jump into the top 4.
I just looked, and it's 14.
14.
And I think it's like 3.3, 3.7, 4% of like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it adds up to 14%.
Right. And it's one of these things where I hate doing this kind of math, but it's also one of these things where it's just a high enough percentage where I think we have to justify hoping for some of these guys and talking about them in the context of the Dallas Mavericks. And so I think however we decided we were going to structure this is talk about some of the top 5, top 6 guys first, and then we'll pivot to who we think might be available at 10. And listen, guys, understand this. We know that the Mavericks are probably going to trade the pick if they stay at 10, but I don't want to talk about that shit yet. I love draft stuff because it's projection in a pure way. Like I find free agency projection to be really toxic because it's all bullshit. This is still like we still have a technical chance. So I really want to talk about guys. So who would you like to start with in these the top 5 or 6 prospects in your eyes?
I mean, I guess Wemby is he almost is like not talked about enough now because he's been talked about so much for basically like 2 full years to where there's like only so many interesting things you can say. And like the Mavs would definitely take him 1. So I feel like Scoot is kind of where it gets interesting because people are starting to kind of say like, are you sure you should take him 2 if it doesn't fit and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like right now your position on that and the him and Brandon Miller kind of question is the most common question I see about the top of the draft now. Is like, is Scoot just there's no reason not to take him number 2, you're crazy, or is it like a discussion? You know what I mean?
Could we talk about Wemby for a second?
Because, yeah, of course.
We have a contributor, Matthew Phillips. He's a little off grid at the moment, but he has just been vehement in being like, I don't feel comfortable taking a 7'5" guy, period. I'm scared of Porzingis, like injuries. And one of the things that I have been trying to read up on and trying to ask everybody about, and Brian Windhorst covered this pretty well in his piece, is it really seems like the medical side sounds wrong. The the kind of wellness industry sounds a little hokey too, but like it really feels like there's a team around him that is dedicated to making sure that his body is taken care of, like LeBron James takes care of himself now. And it's kind of hard to understate that. I read something about how his team expects him to get a certain number of hours of sleep per day, which tickles me to no end because, like, as an old man now, I also wish to have a certain number of hours of sleep per day, and I can't do this. But it for people who haven't watched him, and let's just assume for the sake of argument, we have a lot of people that really haven't paid any attention to Wemby. Tell me about him from your perspective.
I mean, it's KD who can be your main rim protector and everything that entails as far as just like the most interesting thing to me that about him is that he like flips the court's geometry by actually being like a real rim protector who can shoot to that level. So even if he didn't end up being like the primary creator to the extent, like let's say he doesn't reach some of his best outcomes and he's not the primary creator, like top 5 guy in the league, he still would be, it's like what AD does on defense with the best floor stretcher. Like even if he doesn't have this like primary creation outcome, it's still so impactful. So then you start putting in the fact that he is a pretty good passer and will only get better. And you do imagine he'll be a little bit more like Durant as far as creating his own shot and kind of running all the offense through him. And it just kind of becomes insane that someone can impact 2 ways that much and just kind of change the dimensions of the court by stretching it on offense and then erasing things on defense. I mean, like combining Rudy Gobert and Kevin Durant sounds insane, but and I don't like to do too many comps like that, obviously, because they're sort of, they don't put the full picture. But just if someone had never seen him and you're like, that's a chance for what his impact would be, it's literally that level of like erasing everything on defense and infinite stretching on offense.
And so for everybody that, I'm trying to find like the best quality picture, and then I'm going to switch over to it. 7'5" is a real thing. That's the first thing that I would like to get across to people that are sort of questionable about this. This is not a fun-filled, okay, we're listing him at 7'5" because there's some like height inflation, which tends to happen with like college guys. But there's a picture of him, and you can just Google it. I'm not able to find like a good enough thing to where I would want to share it with the stream. But if you Google Victor Wembanyama, Rudy Gobert, there's a picture of him where he is a legitimate 3.5 inches taller than Rudy Gobert. And when he burst onto the scene 4 years ago as like this 7 foot tall, like 14-year-old, you assume, okay, defensive, yada, yada, back to the basketball. You assume like a lot of traditional center traits. And what you sort of led with is the part that I'm curious if more people don't, we've seen like the fact that he shot the step back 3 and then ran in for his own tip dunk. He's basically the kind of player body wise that you can't create him on a video game. That's basically what, because like Yao Ming, like were you around when Yao Ming came in the league? So like Yao Ming was like incredibly weak, and the Rockets really built up his strength, but he was still a traditional back to the basket center. This guy is a stretch 5, and if the Mavericks were to luck into the number 1 player, I've seen a lot of fans being like, "Well, the Mavericks should trade him." Absolutely fucking
no.
not.
He's perfect for Luka. Like absolutely. I mean,
Luka's perfect for him.
Yeah.
That's the real rub, because one of the things I'm really curious about with him is if he goes to a team that doesn't have great guards, because frankly, a lot of guards don't know how to get the ball to bigs, even if he's perimeter oriented. He would be incredible. That would be like, to me, like I've been kind of dark about this Mavericks offseason. You don't go from you go from being a contender, like a championship contender almost immediately, in my opinion, based just on those two alone, Luka and Wembanyama. But like you said earlier, we probably shouldn't talk about it too much because 3% chance, et cetera. So then you pivoted to, you talked briefly about Scoot Henderson, who now I'm going to let you talk about Scoot. I want to go find that picture of Scoot Henderson where he looks like late stage Baron Davis.
He's just completely jacked. Yeah. Scoot, I think, is interesting because I think people's first thought would be either we would trade him, trade a number 2 pick, or we take Brandon Miller, and kind of thinking about like, we already have Hardy. If we re-sign Kyrie, all of this thought process. Mm-hmm. But I personally actually think Scoot, I would take him number 1.
Ooh.
Not over Wemby, but in the past few drafts, going back to probably Zion, like even like Cade and Paulo, I really believe in Scoot that much. The fact that he's a guard, I have the same thoughts other people have where, like, you know, wings and guys with size are usually the best players on championship teams.
Mm-hmm.
But Scoots, I really am a believer in him. Like, I think he's incredible. I think the biggest worry has been his shot, but he has a great mid-range shot. And he was shooting on a pro arc in the G League. Mm-hmm. And if you look at like John Morant and John Wall and all the guys that have come out, Russell Westbrook, who've been these super athletic point guards, they've shot a couple % better on the college arc. I just don't really I don't see that as being quite as concerning when he has like the mid-range touch that he has. And mid-range gets into that like Chris Paul gets you into his pocket on the pick and roll. That's the thing is like he is not just the Westbrookian whirling dervish. While he is that, he is much more of a classical point guard besides the 3-point shot. But he is like very adept in the pick and roll. Every single like culture thing about him is glowing, which that stuff, you can kind of say that about all the guys at the top eventually. It's like, how much does it really mean? But I just think people are hung up on that shooting being this thing that means he can only fit into some kind of context. And I think he's a lot more intelligent as a basketball player than that.
Okay. Well, and then I have this picture pulled up. We all saw Jaden Hardy. Jaden Hardy's an older player. Like he's 21, I'm pretty sure at this point. Scoot is 18 in this photo. He's a man. He is a middle linebacker. This is strength is probably one of the most underappreciated things in the NBA. And it's one of the hardest things that players have to develop when they first come into the league. You go look at it. It was really one of the things why people were so concerned about Kevin Durant. You Google Kevin Durant now versus Kevin Durant then, and he's just put on all this muscle. Scoot comes ready equipped. And then the thing that I really liked, there were these 2 games in Vegas earlier this year. I only watched the first one, but Scoot, you can tell in his interviews is hyper competitive and wants to prove himself against Wembanyama. And you can't really underrate that to me. That sort of, you can't teach that. Like we've been talking about with DeAndre Ayton for a little while now, where it's just so clear that Ayton doesn't really want to compete. Sorry, just the truth. And with this guy, he wants to fight. And I'm really in it. If the Mavericks ended up at 2, I think they would have to consider like who can they, because like the Rockets need a point guard. Like they need Scoot Henderson. Obviously you get 2, 3, or 4. You'd probably have to consider what kind of trade package do you get. But I like, man, taking that dude at 2 or any of the other guys we're going to talk about at 2, 3, or 4 is really just intoxicating to me.
Part of my thought process too about him in comparison to Miller, because I do see the ways that Brandon Miller would like help the Mavericks immediately. Mm-hmm. But I think by the deadline, Scoot Henderson's value would be even higher if he's the player I think he is. And you kind of have to, if you're going to be scouting these guys, you kind of have to make your pick based on that, right? And if they see that Scoot Henderson is that good, he's only going to get more valuable. And I was going to talk about this later, but I was just looking at last year's draft order and like the fact that Jalen Williams went 12th. And then by the deadline, he would have been like, you just get a star with him. You know what I mean? Regardless. And so I just think you have to kind of be thinking about that. If there's all these moving pieces, and the Mavs probably, they're not a completed team. So I think Scoot, his value would only go up. You know what I mean? Whereas like Amen, I don't think he would fit very well with the team. And you could say it's like an infusion of athleticism. We're going to trade him later, but I don't think you could really like show him off very well. But Scoot, I feel like just the tantalizing glimpses of him kind of, maybe you trade Hardy and you have Scoot as that like 6-man off the bench guy. He's going to have insane value by the deadline. So like I've kind of been taking that into account too, where we can talk about the draft, and instead of talking about them trading the pick beforehand, kind of look at it like what is these guys' values, in the future and in the short term.
Yeah, and the difference, I think you should talk to us about Miller next. But before we compare the two, they're obviously very different players. But then there's about 18 months in age separating the two of them, where Miller is going to be 21 by like the 3rd week of the regular season, and Scoot Henderson is 19 until February. And I've talked about this a lot on the pod. My opinion is that the key developmental age for most players is like 16 to 22, which is to say nothing bad about Miller. It's just if you're getting Miller, he's kind of a ready-made guy who's probably closer to his ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the way I like to frame the Miller thing is like people have probably heard this kind of discussion if they listen to Mavs Moneyball podcast about how important wings are, how important two-way wings are. This was kind of the Jabari versus Paulo argument, was that if you're going to take the creator, but he's an inefficient creator who can't be one of the best players in the NBA, it's better to take the two-way wing. So it was like, would you rather have Golden State Andrew Wiggins or Carlos Boozer? Was like kind of a way people would frame that Jabari Paulo conversation. And I've always been, equally like any good NBA intelligentsia thought that way about wings. But I think sometimes it does get taken too far, where the Jabari Paulo thing already looks like I have a lot of faith in Jabari actually growing and becoming better. But in general, it looks like Paulo is the easy number one. And I think sometimes we go a little too far, like in the other direction. And I think that's kind of what the Brandon Miller scoop thing is that you're just taking a guy with a lower ceiling, chasing like the archetypal value if you're a good team. It's like these teams aren't even, for the Mavericks, it's a little different. But if you're a bad team and you're like, we need the two-way wing, you have to get a player who can be the best player on a championship team first. So that's where the Scoop Miller debate is with me. But I realize with the Mavericks, it's a little bit different because of like the urgency and the, trying to win now. But I don't see Miller. I mean, he could end up being as good as like Paul George or Jason Tatum. Like, I'm not going to say those things aren't possible. I just don't see like that level of wiggle and burst that it takes. But you can become such a good mid-range shooter and be so crafty getting into it that's the thing. Like Brandon Ingram is not just like constantly taking guys to the hole. You know what I mean? So I think it is kind of hard to tell what Miller, like how good he can be based off that. And he is a really good defender. And I actually like that he's a good passer. Like he likes to pass. And in interviews, he said passing is his favorite part of his game. And I feel like people just underrated it. I mean, because he gets compared to Jabari a lot, but Jabari was just definitely like not a good playmaker. But I think Brandon Miller, everything he does on the court is very intentful. Like the way he plays defense. I think I said this in our write-up of him for Mavs Moneyball, but I find it very hard to imagine peak Brandon Miller as a guy people are like, he's just not a winner. He's making mistakes in playoff games. And I just feel like he's kind of good enough at all the little things. So I actually don't feel like I'm low on him. I just see this like creation ceiling that's obvious for the other guys that with him, it's like it could happen, but
Okay. Well, so that's like three of the guys so far. With I think a lot of at least Mavs Moneyball commenters really like the Brandon Miller fit. Could you go into a little more of an explainer of why you think that might be the case? And you wrote about this, of course, and I'll link to it in the thing, but let's just assume that our listeners are not the same as our readers.
Well, obviously we need wings that can guard and shoot threes, and we know how that like fits with Luka. So he really would be pretty hand in glove. And he's sorry, my dog.
That's okay.
She's being good. She just walked by. I didn't know if she was being
mine will come in here and probably bite cords, but I put her in her crate for once. I forget this. There was one at the end of the season, like during the Spurs game, when my dog was like tearing apart a pillow, and I kept having to leave the stream. It was just top quality video. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just that sort of classic 3-and-D thing that fits with Luka. I mean, I think Miller would be able to do that pretty quickly and actually sort of like insulate him from some of his weaknesses early on, because even if like as a Mavs fan, I think we want the offense to become more varied and for guys to be able to do things that aren't Luka or just Luka and Kyrie. Like still, even if Kyrie resigns, it's like we want the wings to be able to do stuff. And I think Miller would be able to. But it would kind of insulate him from his like early flaws if he is just shooting and attacking a closeout instead of it being like, now this guy needs to attack just so like the offense has more options. Like I think the way it will be like Luka and Kyrie centric would make him pretty seamless offensively. And I think defensively it's going to take him some time to be as impactful as maybe you'd want if you're saying this guy's going to like immediately be a starter. But I think Brandon Miller will be a very good defender. He's just not that strong yet.
Okay.
So you're going to get like some weak side blocks, and you're going to get times where his length pays dividends. But I don't think he's going to come right out and be a stopper, because those dudes almost never are. Like the Herb Jones defensive rookie of the year or defensive player of the year candidate as a rookie is like insanely rare. You know what I mean? So.
Yep. No, that's that's of note to at least consider as we're pipe dreaming to get into the top four. Well, now we've talked about three of like the top four picks. Who are the other guys that you think kind of round out that if the Mavericks were to get 2, 3, 4, you think that they would consider or they should consider? Like, let's just talk about those guys.
One I've been thinking about a lot. Like I said, I think it would be really hard for Amin to develop. Like, he has no shot. I like him. I think he has a lot more potential than like a Ben Simmons because he's not afraid. You know what I mean? Like, there's like, and people that have followed the Thompson twins talk about how they are like, they watch film constantly. They're just like obsessive, perfect culture type guys. And I think if you told me Ben Simmons was that, I would like be interested. You know what I mean? So I think, and he's not exactly like Ben Simmons, but just to give an idea of like that kind of crazy athlete who can also pass, who can't shoot. But I think it would be really hard for that kind of player to develop next to Luke and stuff. So the one I've been thinking about a lot, if we were to get to say the fourth pick, is Cam Whitmore as opposed to Brandon Miller. Because because I mean,
I love it.
I don't necessarily like the thing the Mavs need so much is defense. But if you're going to get the fourth pick, I think it might be just too high for Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks. Like, I don't know if I mean, I guess I'm a best player available kind of guy. And like I said, it's hard whenever the team you want to immediately help. But if we're not going to trade the pick, I feel like you can't reach. And Cam Whitmore is another one of those guys that by the deadline next year, people could be like, oh, how did this guy go sixth? Like, he's a supreme athlete who can attack and shoot, super strong, super wiggly, just kind of like a natural. And I think he came back from injury in his college year in Villanova. They kind of brought him along slow, and he was like the sixth man. And I feel like I could just see that happening. I have him pretty high. I would kind of have him right there next to Brandon Miller as far as I see them, but I think his ceiling's higher. And I don't know how much he would help the Mavs immediately. Like, I don't know if he's ready to have a winning impact as a rookie. I would say he probably doesn't. But you know how Shaedon Sharpe would have those dunks where it's not just like Gerald Green, wide open, fast break dunk that shows athleticism, but it's like there was no play there, and then all of a sudden there was a dunk. Like, half court setting, this shouldn't have happened, and just like the closing speed and the physicality just comes out of nowhere. Like,
well, and we're like, as Mavs fans, I think we are so starved for something like that we don't know it exists. Because nobody fucking does that. Like, the last person that did that was Vince Carter in like 2014. Yeah.
And so the worry with him is that kind of people have talked about Miles Bridges and Jaylen Brown as sort of like the player archetype. And he was like a really bad passer as far as just like his assist percentage and assist to turnovers. And there are all those kind of question marks about what kind of star he could be as far as like eventually leading a team. But he is, I want to say, 6'6", 6'7", built like a truck, kind of has that Jimmy Butler build. So he has a lot of defensive potential. He hasn't really met that either, and I think it might take him a while. But the kind of passing and IQ stuff is the biggest concern because I think the defense, it would be hard for him to be bad by the time he's 28. I mean, he just is an athletic freak. He was a lot, like if you were to watch film of him and you watch the international stuff and like the right before college stuff, you'd be like, oh my God, this guy's the number one pick. Like, he's going to be a superstar. And in college, coming back from injury, it just didn't look as seamless. And he would have these flashes, but then he would have like a 2 of 10 game, kind of taking dumb shots. And those are the kind of guys that, I don't know. I mean, just when you see the ceiling, it's like, I think it'll be crazy if he falls to like 8th. I've seen that happen in mocks.
Yeah.
And I just think it would be a little crazy.
I think we can't really, there's too many like Doctor Strange 14 million scenario type things because depending on how the lottery goes, I think there could be a fair amount of movement within that top 10. So that's where like the mock stuff just kind of is like, and then there's that. So you wrote an Asar Thompson profile that really turned me into him because I've always been more of an Amin guy because of the one-of-one kind of athleticism that Amin Thompson has. But Asar, the way you describe his game, and I'm not as familiar with it as I am Amin because I just like watching his dunks and his crazy layups. But Amin Thompson seems kind of like gives me like is Sean Marion vibes. Is that with some passing? Like,
I would say Amin is like, can you imagine if Sean Marion was basically able to be a full-time point guard and then you start getting into like LeBron light places?
Okay.
But Asar has that kind of similar Sean Marion rangy defensive ability, but he is a really good passer. That's why people actually more commonly talk about Iguodala, because like you can imagine him doing some secondary playmaking. He also struggles with his shot, but he's a little bit further along than I'm in. To me, like it's a lot clearer that his stroke has come along further, but it's still going to be a development for him to be like a spacer. So that's why his fit with the Mavs is a little tricky. But just having a guy who's like an elite secondary creator passer who's also an awesome defender at the wing, it's just like we talk about Josh Green doing those things. It's like, what if the guy was 6'7", one of the best athletes in the world? And the thing is Ausar doesn't really have like the mid-range kind of floater game, and he's not as athletic as a min to just live in the lane and get to the hoop. So I think there is kind of a worry about like his offensive ceiling eventually, but I don't know. I mean, he's still insanely athletic. You know what I mean? And
I do. And that's like what's so appealing to me. And it's funny. Improving a player's shot is probably one of the hardest things you can do outside of improving a player's vision. Because I think vision is kind of inherent. You either have it or you don't. But the shot stuff, I'm highly critical of everything the Mavericks do. But going back to like 2016, Dorian Finney-Smith couldn't hit anything. Yeah. Maxi Kleber couldn't hit anything. Josh Green couldn't hit anything. And all three of those guys became dependable or reliable shooters, depending on how you want to phrase it. And so you pair that with these guys kind of intangibles and athleticism. I would love to take the gamble. It seems like a low chance thing because the Mavericks don't have that kind of time.
Yeah, exactly. And his defense and stuff could be impactful in the short term still, because they're a little bit older too. I think they're closer to Miller's age. They just have so much athleticism that people aren't like that scared off by that, because they're like as athletes, and they've been developing in this sort of overtime elite, as people might know about. It's kind of just like a offshoot league. So but yeah, I agree. I mean, I more wanted to write about him because I'd seen him fall to 10 in a mock, and I was like, if that happened, like we would have to think about it. And if let's say we couldn't trade the pick and you're just there forced to take the pick, like I think you would have to think about taking him, because if the shot develops pretty quickly, he's such a hard worker. I think you could play him at the 4 some, and just like there are times he would be just as impactful. It's so rare for rookies to help anyways that like we have no guarantee that a Jarris Walker will be as good as Ausar off the jump.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's why I get too excited about this stuff, but I can't help it. It's so fun when you watch them. Is there anyone else that would be kind of pie in the sky that you want to hit on before we kind of skip back to the 3 to 4 guys that are going to be available in the 10 range?
I think we covered, as far as if we got a top 4 pick, I don't really think anyone else could go. Like I would be shocked if, even though Taylor Hendricks is flying up boards, and then we'll talk about him now, like I would think someone would trade back. I don't think anyone would reach all the way to 4, because like I said, all those other guys have like real creation upside. Yeah. So it's just kind of, that's always like a tear drop off of, where that creation upside starts and stops.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now we're just going to go with the assumption from here on out that the Mavericks stay at 10. We're also assuming they're going to use the pick. You have written a number of profiles for us at Mavs Moneyball. We're going to have a couple more coming. We only got 5 days until the thing, so I've been trying to have us sort of space out the content where we have enough stuff every day, but we also don't really go overshoot it to where we have to like write the same thing again in a month. Who would you like to kind of chat about next? This is a surprise, guys, because I didn't communicate enough with Logan beforehand.
I think the Hendricks Jarris Walker question is like, I think those are the 2 guys that I've seen the most fan engagement with, like, oh my God, we have the 10th pick and there's 2 dudes who could like really help fix our problems quickly, and are these things we haven't really had, and they're sort of similar players, and that I feel like they kind of have a low offensive floor. Like it wouldn't shock me at all if they're true role players on offense throughout their career, but they also have so much or with Jarris Walker, he has so much other stuff that he's good at that he could be like a star role player. With Hendricks, I feel like it's that the things he's good at, he's already like really, really good at, and they're really important. And he could be 6'10", secondary rim protector Dorian Finney-Smith by like next year. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's the appeal. Is it's like this guy's kind of what we always talk about every team needing. He shoots threes, but he happens to be 6'10" and can already help protect the rim and maybe eventually be a small ball center. Whereas Jarris Walker, I was higher on him coming out of high school because in high school he just looked so dominant, and once you see him in college, Houston didn't really use him that much on offense. And he just kind of, you could see where there was kind of a low offensive floor. But I thought coming out of high school, I told people he's Julius Randle with Draymond Green's soul. And I was like, that was like my favorite player. Like I loved him so much as a prospect. And I have to be kind of realistic about him now, but just to be that like fully grown of a man and to be very intelligent offensively, like that's my favorite kind of prospect is the built like the thing from Fantastic Four, but with something like supercomputer in your brain. And but I could see how it wouldn't work out offensively if he doesn't shoot well also, because he's kind of small to play center, which I know I'm talking about both guys at the same time. So
no, it's fine. It seems our chat is very skeptical that either makes it to 10. And that's where I can't tell you guys how many, like, let's look at Luka Doncic falling to 3 as an example. I can't tell you how many times over the years we have watched NBA teams do the obvious wrong thing with a given pick. So I think it's fun to sort of talk about this because you don't know what guys talk themselves out of. I mean, we watched the Kings and the Suns talk themselves out of Luka because he went to Hard Rock Cafe and ordered a bunch of food with Mina Kimes. Like, I'm very convinced that's why those, like, there was like a fat Luka narrative and that he didn't have a left hand. And it's like, it was stupid at the time. So it's like when you get past the top 5 and you're into kind of the way I always think about the draft is I think about it 1 through 3, then I think about it 4 through 20, then 20 through 40. Because all of us, like, you get in these tiered zones where teams, frankly, just start to lose their minds.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I remember when Paul George was drafted, it was like, wait, that guy made it to there? And he was an incredible college prospect. He just played at Fresno State. So nobody really wanted to, like, oh, well, he didn't play against good competition. And it's like, okay, calm down. So like, I'm more than willing to talk about these guys. I will say the Taylor Hendricks one is fun because Josh Bowe very rarely latches on to people. My co-host and writer over at Mavs Moneyball, co-editor, he latched on to Hendricks early in the process, and he was like, "This guy, there's just no way this guy's going to be here. I'm falling in love, and there's no way he's going to be there." And he did this with Bane too, where he was like losing his mind that the Mavericks had no interest in Bane, and then look, a year and a half into Bane's career.
If he did it early enough with Hendricks, he might have been mocked at like 18 and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like he's been the biggest riser. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense because he's such a good shooter to be as long as he is and to be that mobile defensively. He's just like the perfect playoff defender. And he's the kind of guy that someone could take 6th and he scores 12 points a game for the rest of his career. And it's never talked about as a bad pick. Like he's just going to be that kind of role player. And when you're that big, you kind of have some room to develop anyways. Like he has a really high release point. If you get him enough shots, if he can maybe get into a mid-range pull-up, like I don't think he's ever going to pressure the rim. Right. But when you start, once they kind of learn that mid-range pull-up, the mid-range is always where those guys can, I mean, you can't compare people to Kawhi, but that's what happened. Kawhi figured out the mid-range pull-up. And, that kind of just is always a development path that means they can be better than expected.
That's right. So Walker seems like I've not watched enough of Walker, but I like everything Kelvin Sampson related my entire life. Those guys are just they're bad men in the best ways. And the Mavericks could use a bad man.
Yeah.
They don't have anybody and haven't for quite some time that mixes it up with sheer physicality. And I hear you about the undersized center thing, but man, if they were to end up with either one of these dudes, I would be out of my mind.
I know. And they're the two guys that the most resemble a thing that we have wanted for years. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, whether it's that grown man strength or whether it's a like more athletic version of Maxey. It's just like we've watched Maxey be this thing that's been really important to the Mavericks. Mm-hmm. And we see that like, oh, this archetype makes sense. Like, it's making it look like he's outplaying DeAndre Ayton and Rudy Gobert because he's this certain archetype. So what happens when that guy is a freak athlete or at least a very athletic 22-year-old and not so I think that's what makes them so interesting is how much we kind of have a proof of concept of like how quickly they could help. And I will say as far as I don't think either guy will get to 10, but it only takes one is the other thing. You know what I mean? So,
I mean, that's where like the concept of they are going to trade it sort of offends me is not the right word, but like frustrates me because you don't know what's going to be there.
Yeah.
Friend of me of the show, Matt Moore, always says this, where he's like, I've seen teams go into draft night with the intent of doing something, and then they end up with a player they didn't really want. Well, what if you ended up with a player that you did want?
Yeah,
like,
and you didn't expect to get. Yeah.
Yeah, like that was the issue with Bain in 2018, 19, whenever 2020, whenever the hell it was, where just like they didn't consider the guy. So it's like, come on. But it's this just feels like when you look at next year's draft ahead a little bit, until like when Carlos Boozer's kid gets into the league, it just feels. And then there's that crazy guy up in Maine. Have you seen him?
Cooper Flagg.
Cooper Flagg. Oh my God.
Someone was like, he's Larry Bird. And I was like, no, he's Jimmy Chitwood from Hoosiers.
He's Jimmy Chitwood with like Jimmy Butler's competitiveness.
Yeah, he's wild.
He is a wild boy. Everybody Google Cooper Flagg. This guy is like the next great, like we've been looking. We haven't been looking. Like you can tell, like American media latches on to like the next great white American player, which is how you get so much fucking Austin Reeves hype. Yeah. Cooper Flagg is it.
Yeah.
And anyway,
it's the perfect name for that. Great white Cooper Flagg with two
from
G's.
Maine.
It's from
Who the
Maine,
hell is from Maine? God. Who else? So who else would you kind of be excited about at 10?
Cason Wallace, I have like zero doubt is going to be good. That's just like a good role player. I think the issue with people is we're so like perimeter heavy right now, and he's a guard. Mm-hmm. But he does have that Drew Marcus Smart body type where he could play a lot at the 2. And I just kind of think he's going to actually be impactful as a rookie. Like none of these other guys, people overrate how quickly rookies can impact winning.
Always.
And even the ones that you see that are really good, really athletic, it's like you look at the box score stuff and the advanced stats, it always points to that. I can actually see Cason Wallace because he's a good defender who can shoot off the catch, which obviously would fit perfectly as a Maverick. So I think he could help quickly. It's just an issue of like, do you just have too many perimeter players to, are we always going to have Luka at the 4 and create that problem that we already had where we don't have any like secondary rim protection and stuff?
Yep.
But I think that makes Wallace interesting. Anthony Black. I feel like one of these guys is where like it starts to be like one of these guys should fall. So what would we do with that decision? You know what I mean?
Right. And here he played. Let's see. Cason Wallace was right up the road from me. He went to Richardson High School, which is I think the high school my son is going to feed into. And then I have been big on Anthony Black just because he went to where I went to high school in Coppell for 3 years before transferring to Duncanville. And I remember watching this guy as like a freshman. And, it's kind of surprising how quickly like narratives change around guys because Anthony Black was kind of an afterthought to Nick. Was it Nick Smith over in Arkansas?
Yeah.
He was like kind of a tertiary recruit. And by the end of the year, he's the best player. Now he cannot shoot. Well, that's not fair. His shot is odd and needs some mechanical tweaking. But what I find so interesting about Black is that you could project so many different things on him. Yeah. And, depending on his role, he's 6'7", but he's kind of more of a point guard. Well, I don't, if you're at 6'7", at that point, it's about who can you defend? Can he, right. and this is kind of my question for you, because I don't know the answer to this. Do you think at 6'7", he could eventually become a guy who could guard your tier 1, like small forwards, which tend to dominate the league these days?
Yeah, I guess that is a really good question about him because I think his defense is going to be awesome and he's going to be like a playmaker on defense. Like he's got really good instincts. He's really good at creating fast breaks and just getting that big turnover and stuff. And I was going to say something else. I was going to say as far as Arkansas, he had terrible spacing. So while he can't shoot very well, the Arkansas spacing was like a special case of bad. And so I am interested to see what he looks like with NBA spacing. I think people could just be like, oh my gosh, he has way more burst and just ability to get in the lane than people expected. But I don't know if he'll have that kind of, he is strong and he's tenacious. For some reason, just based off what I've seen, it seems like he would get kind of eaten up by the bigger ones, like LeBron and stuff.
Right, but he's so skinny right now. But who at that point you're kind of questioning who doesn't get eaten up by LeBron.
Exactly. And it's hard, like Brandon Miller, Jarris Walker, you can say, okay, he's got like all that muscle on him already, but I feel like it's not really fair for him to be like, no, Anthony Black will never be that guy. But he's just not extremely strong right now, which I say that on offense, he like loves contact and he gets the foul line a ton. But for some reason, I feel like that's just like, I can't project the guy out to do that. Except with Walker and Hendricks, they're just actually massive. Like they're 6'9", 6'10". And then you can say, I feel like those guys that are 6'6" and end up guarding the 6'8", 6'9" guys, like you almost can't see that coming. It's just like they become so strong and so mentally good at what they do. You know what I mean? But I do think he's going to be an excellent defender and versatile because he's 6'7". Someone called him a 6'7" Derek White, and like that sounds like an awesome player.
That sounds like an awesome player.
Yeah.
God. And then the Case and Wallace guy was somebody who I earnestly wasn't familiar with because I watched precisely 0 Kentucky basketball this year. And I also feel, and this is, I don't know if this is accurate this year, but I feel like it's accurate a lot of years. Guys aren't who they become when they're at Kentucky. Like, there's some people who you get very little flashes of anything, and I can't understand how Calipari keeps getting these recruits when dudes just are different there. It's very confusing to me.
Yeah, something I like about Case and Wallace is, you know how Drew Holiday can just win games with how long his arm is for a point guard. Like he'll just be like, I'm going to steal that. And there's nothing you can do about it. Instead of winning with just an unstoppable offensive play, I will do something, or he blocks a shot, or he gets the right rebound for a point guard. That's kind of how Case and Wallace, he's very long and strong. And I've just seen him make rebounds that it's like, that was the rebound that both teams' big guy was supposed to get to seal the game. And he was like, no, I will be sealing this game with my own strength and athletic. Like, it's not even that crazy of an athlete, but it's that certain kind of strength and length at like 6'3", 6'4", that it's just really impactful. And he's good off the shot. I don't know if the Kentucky guard thing correlates with him. I actually don't think it does. A lot of people are like, maybe he has more to him. I just don't think he has that kind of like burst. Like Maxey had it. I just think he's kind of a different caliber, different type of athlete, really, because he's a lot stronger. But the Kentucky thing does make me pause and be like, am I wrong? Is he just going to like kind of going off pick and rolls, nail mid-range jumpers, and be like strong enough to get people on his hip? Like I can kind of see that all happening. He's just not extremely quick for a point guard.
So I'm trying to remember who wrote this profile for Mavs Moneyball, but whoever wrote the profile of Case and Wallace for Mavs Moneyball said that his like upside case is a Drew Holiday-like player, not Drew Holiday, but rangy combo guard that mixes shit up. Is that fair, or what did you think of that comp?
I think it is, because even though I kind of belittle his ceiling slightly, I don't think Drew Holiday's just bursting past people. Like he got there by craft. He got there because he's strong. He got there because he can hit mid-range jumpers and kind of self-create them. And he's still pretty inefficient offensively anyways. Like it wouldn't shock me if Case and Wallace had that kind of touch and that kind of strength combination and just added to his craft to get there. Just because I don't think Drew Holiday, it's not like his game is predicated on getting past people. So, yeah, I mean, a Drew Holiday light I don't think is crazy at all. But even, I mean, we've seen how impactful like Marcus Smart is. And so I don't think he has to be that big of a scorer for people to be like this, to be like a $20 million a year player. You know what I mean? Yep. And I think that's why Case and Wallace is interesting, because getting somebody like that at 11 or 12 is just a victory. You know what I mean? Or 10. But I think of him for some reason as like, you know, I guess I have him in my little personal thing at 11 or 12, but people will be like, oh, you're not that high on him. And I'm like, no, I feel like I am. I know that he's going to be really good. I just kind of lean a little bit more towards ceiling when I do these rankings. And that's probably because I don't have an NBA job and won't get fired for feeling that way. But
right. Well, and that's what's, you know, who was the guy that said Luka, he wouldn't take him in the first round?
Rashad Phillips. That's the Yoda guy, right?
Yoda. Right. So one of the things that I was very amused by several years ago was some media woman was like, Rashad Phillips invented online scouting. And it's like, no, like people, that's one of my favorite, actually like draft Twitter is like one of my favorite things about Twitter, because you come across these incredibly in-depth profiles where people spend all this time dipping into stuff. Like if you want to learn about guys between YouTube and some of the websites that are in existence, you can really deep dive.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you got to kind of trust these people's judgments. Like our friend, he writes for the site occasionally, Mavs Draft, gets picked on to no end because he didn't think that the guy who is the Utah center who was drafted out of Auburn,
Kessler,
he was like, Kessler's not an NBA player.
Yeah.
But it's like, everybody has misses. Like
I was a Johnny Davis guy, so I don't,
So right, it's like
I don't know if I'm illegitimate because of it, but
it's just so much fun to kind of talk about these guys because it's just there's so much tape, and we are getting higher quality tape. And now more and more often these guys are playing against better competition year in and out, so you can actually do some interesting projections. That's what makes some of these guys harder than others, with like the Thompson twins who played an overtime elite against kind of bad competition. So it's like, whereas when you see Scoot and Victor Wembanyama playing 2 games against each other, it's like, okay, we're good here. We've seen these 2 guys. I feel good. So
that verdict about the G League seeming translatable and it being grown men. There is one guy I wanted to talk about because I saw him mocked to the Mavericks and it kind of shocked me, but I know he is rising fast. And that's Leonard Miller. Have you seen any of Leonard Miller?
I've not. Tell me about him.
He plays on the G League team with Scoot. And a year ago, I was like, I don't think I would take this guy in the first round. He's so long and he can handle. Like, he's a 6'10" face-up guy. And I saw the potential, but he was just so squirmy and not coordinated and like long, but he was falling down all the time. And it just looked like he was going to break into the splits every time he tried to make a move, kind of thing. And then sort of Christian Woodish. I'm not going to say that he's like going to be a bad defensive player like Wood, but just the way he's built and the way he can handle. And then I started watching him again this past season, and it's like game to game to game, his body grows into itself. And now he just lives around the rim and is super forceful. And he's the 6'10" guy who can lead a fast break. And it's just, he isn't that great of a shooter yet. He makes some defensive mistakes, but like, I think he is going to rise, and I feel like OKC at 12 just like makes so much sense for a guy like that. But like Chris Webber meets Marvin Williams is the thing I joked about, like some kind of midway point between those 2 things. And like, I'm enamored by him. I want to watch him more because he's definitely flawed, and I have a bad habit of I see the flaws, and other people are like, this is a problem, and I'm like, but look, he's 6'10", maybe 6'11", and you know what I mean, and he's leading a fast break. But he's an interesting player, and I think he's not ready-made, and I know the Mavs might want a ready-made prospect, but he really is interesting, especially for the skill set and where we need help. Because even if we get a center or we get wings, I think eventually we want that guy who's like the playoff big type, like I've said, like the athletic young Maxey. And Leonard Miller, I don't know where I don't even know. He's developing so quickly and is such a like weird, interesting player who's kind of changing overnight that I could see him having a athletic Maxey kind of career. I could see him having an all-star career. I could see him being Anthony Randolph, because that's how people felt about Anthony Randolph. Like, I'm really just sort of in the process of trying to figure out how I feel about it. But once I saw him talk to the Mavs, I was like, I want to talk about this guy, because I never expected someone to mock him up there. I think it was USA Today. So,
well, this has been more than I could have asked for, because I told you it's going to be a half hour. We're closing in on 50 minutes.
We both ramble. I knew.
No, but this is number one. People love talking about this stuff, and number two, we might only have a very short window because there's a 20% chance we don't get to talk about any draft picks ever, apparently ever again. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I was just actually looking at this I made like a list of all the draftable like first round guys, and I was trying to figure out who the funniest person for the Mavs to take as a bad draft pick would be for them to. I was trying to close off on what will the Mavs mistake look like, which I think Grady Dick is going to be good, but just the idea of them getting I think he's kind of underrated defensively. Like, I don't think he's just a complete sieve, but the idea, or like Nick Smith Jr., like the Mavs just getting another Jaden Hardy type would just like blow my mind.
What's that do? Right. Why do we need another guard that likes to shoot?
Yeah, I don't know. So I guess that's what I was trying to figure out. Like, what will they do to make me mad?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so here's the deal, guys. I need about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hop back into our regular Friday afternoon live show, which I want you to participate in. So if you have not, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Go ahead and hit the notify me button, or just head on over and wait in the waiting room, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Guys, this has been Kirk Henderson and Logan Thompson. We each write at Mavs Moneyball. Logan writes when I do berate him into sitting down and writing something, he writes these beautiful 1,200 word pieces. The Alsar Thompson one will sell you on him, I promise. Go look for it over at the site. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. And you guys got us over to 1,000 subscribers today, which is apparently a big deal. Now I can figure out what the next steps I need to take are. So we'll be back here in a few minutes. be sure to head over to the mat, or just basically, stay on the YouTube page here, and we'll be back shortly. Thanks everybody who was listening. The podcast listeners, I'm not sure when I'm going to run this one, because I'm going to have 2 podcasts to run in a row. Everybody have a good day. Talk soon.